Welcome back to another episode of Raul's World of Synths. I am Raul. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Doepfer A144. If you joined us last time, we were discussing some of the basics of the A144, some of the features and functions of this, as well as the front panel. We kind of went over what each one of these do. In this one, what we're going to do is kind of go a little bit further. We're going to get some oscilloscope views of how this module interacts with the A135 and get a basic idea of what we mean by morphing. Even though a lot of you may be familiar with it out there, we're just going to kind of combine the visual and the auditory and see how this module functions. So we're just going to jump right into the demonstration. Before I jump in, I do want to kind of set up what we're going to do in this demonstration, and that's going to be, we're going to just do a basic demonstration of manual morphing and then some automatic morphing, as it's called in the manual, which is basically with a CV signal being fed in. That's going to be in the first part of this next segment. And then in the second part of this segment, we're going to be looking at sort of a problem that arises when you're doing CV-controlled morphing. And we'll look a little closer at how to get some better results with it. So that's going to be the next two video segments. So let's go ahead and jump right in. And I'm just going to kind of lay out what we're going to be setting up here. We're going to be taking the four outputs right here from our A110. And actually, let me just move my camera over ever so slightly. I don't like to do this after I've recorded, but I'm going to do it right now. Zoom out a little. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to be taking the four outputs of our wave forms here, and we're just going to go sequentially. So we're going to take the saw and go to input 1 over here, the pulse, go to input 2, triangle, go to input 3, and then sine, and go to input 4. Then we're going to get the morph controller involved, and we're going to take the four outputs of the morph controller, and we're going to just patch them into the four CV inputs. So ideally, what we should see is kind of a morphing through these different waveforms. So let's get there, and then we'll talk about what we've done to that point, and then we'll go a little further. So let's start with the saw wave, and we're just going to patch right into input 1, as we said. There we go. And then we're going to take the pulse output from our A110, go into input 2. We're going to take the triangle output, go to input 3 of our A135, take the sine output of our A110 to input number 4. I've tried to keep all the signals about the same. I have all the gains all the way down. So when we do patch in our morph output over here, it will sort of affect them sequentially. And we'll hear that in a little bit. Incidentally, in case you're wondering what this red cable is, that's going to be where our audio signal is going to be going out to our oscilloscope over here on the right, which is just kind of waiting in the wings, and then out to our mixer. Okay, so we got the first part of the patch. All our waveforms are going to the labeled sequential inputs. Now we're going to take the outputs from our morph controller and patch them over into the CV inputs. So we'll take output number 1 of our morph controller, go into input CV input number 1 right there, and then same thing, output number 2 to CV input number 2, and then output number 3, get in there, to CV input number 3, output number 4 to CV input number 4. Okay, so now we should have a nice little smooth morph. And let's go ahead and test it out. I have my morph set all the way to 0, so now if I move it up, you should see it at the oscilloscope. And you should also hear it as well. No doubt that I hear it a little bit loud, so I'm going to turn my level down. Okay, so that's about right there at about the 3 position, I guess. Now I'm going to switch over to about 4, and you can already hear that it's changed. And if you look at the oscilloscope, you can also see that the waveform is kind of moving towards our pulse wave. And right about there, I'm just doing it by sight, is our pulse wave. Now if I keep going, you can see our pulse wave is now sort of changing into our triangle wave. There's our triangle wave, approximately. And then now if I keep moving, it's going to turn into our sine wave. And right about there is about the highest it gets. And then if I keep going all the way on the other side, it goes down to 0 again. So that's the idea about what the Morph controller is going to be able to do for you when in use with the A135. It's just sort of sequentially turning up and turning down the individual VCAs. And so having heard that, hopefully now when you look at this right here, this graphic, and I may sort of zoom in on it a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. Just move that out of the way for you. This graphic should make a little bit more sense now. If you look at the output of 1 on the Morph controller, see how the level goes up and then down, and then it's kind of overlapping with the output number 2, and then output number 2 is overlapping with number 3, and so on. So that's how it's creating that kind of nice smooth morphing that we're seeing over the oscilloscope. Now let's actually go in the opposite direction. So we're starting all the way on the clockwise position, and we're going to go backwards. So we should see our sine wave first. There's our sine wave. And if you kind of track it via the Morph controller, then we're actually right now looking at the uppermost peak of number 4. Now as I move this way, and I look at my oscilloscope over there, you can see my triangle wave now, and my sine has disappeared. So now we're probably somewhere in this one right here. And then as I move it further, you can see it changing. And now I'm pretty close to my pulse wave. So we're somewhere in number 2 over here. And then if I go a little further, we can see our saw wave. So now we know that we're over here. Sorry, forgot that was blocking you. Now we're over at number 1. Okay, and then we go all the way to the back. And of course now everything is turned back down. So that's the basic idea of the morphing. Now, having said that and having seen that we're doing it with a VCA, now you can kind of possibly get an idea of how you can utilize this. It's basically 4 kind of moving output CV signals that you can use with 4 CV inputs. Now we're using them on an A135 voltage controlled mixer VCA, but you could also pipe them just for experimental uses to effects or different filters or anything like that. There's also some other uses that we'll look at a little bit later. So that's manual morphing. And then there's also the so-called automatic morphing that most of us know as modulation when we're dealing with the modular. And usually that's going to involve taking a CV signal from an external module, like a A147. This could be an LFO signal, or it could be something like a envelope generator. Basically anything that produces a low-frequency signal that can sort of move or sort of create this manual movement that we're doing with our hand via a CV. Now there is one kind of fine print to that. When we discussed it in the first video, if you were with us, on the basics of the A144, I brought up the fact that the A144 CV input is actually 0 to 5 volts, which we'll kind of see in a moment how that's going to affect us. So, but let's proceed like everything is normal as can be. And we just, maybe we're doing a patch and we want to kind of integrate a sine wave to kind of emulate that kind of manual control that we were doing a moment ago. So I'm going to take my sine wave output and I'm going to patch it into my Morph controller. And I have my CV input all the way up, so we should immediately hear some movement here. As soon as I get maybe the frequency up a little bit. And you can see a little bit of sort of quick movement. And you can see it's kind of moving through the waveforms, but very fast. So let me bring that down a little bit. Then get that to morph a little slower so we can actually see what's flying by us. And go a little slower than that. There we go. And you saw the sine wave. So we went saw to sine right there. And that time we went sine to saw. So you can see it's bouncing back and forth between the two. But one thing that's kind of cutting into the effectiveness of this patch is the fact that the input over here is only responsive in 0 to 5 volts. And this guy over here, A147, is actually going above 0 and then below 0. So if you were to look at, like let's say that was our line right there, it goes above and then it goes below. So let's see that sort of in action. Let's see, I'm going to unpatch my CV signal over here. And we're going to take a look at that CV signal. So let me get a cable to patch over to our oscilloscope. And I'm going to take our sine wave. And I'm going to show you a handy little utility that will help us sort of correct this. And so I'm just going to patch it over here into our oscilloscope so we can take a look at it. And I'm going to zoom in. I'm actually in single mode, so I need to flip over to my dual layer mode and then maybe zoom out a little bit just so we can see the full movement of the sine wave. Might need to adjust my frequency just a little bit. And we're not definitely going to not hear anything because the signal is in way low frequency right there. But let's kind of get it where we can visually see something. Okay, so there is our sine wave. And you can see our magnification worked for our audio, but not so much for this signal. So I'm going to change over to a different magnification level and see there we're getting the above 0 and the below 0. But I'm going to zoom out a little bit more so we can see it a little bit better. And I'm not sure how far I should go right there, but let me bring up maybe the frequency until I can see it, and then I'll kind of work my way backwards. Okay. Let's see. Okay, there it is. And I'll zoom out a little bit. I only want to get to the point where I can see the waveform above and below 0. Okay. So that's actually not bad. Let me zoom out one more. See if we can get that to show up a little bit. There we go. Okay. So we can see our waveform, and it's very clear to us right now that it is actually going below 0. We can see it's going about to -5 right there, and then it's going above to +5. Not exactly what our Morph controller over here in the center needs. It needs 0 to +5. So in the next video, we're going to go through a way that you can fix this. And I'll give you just a little preview. We're going to be jumping into a little bit of patching with the A183-2 to kind of get this going a little bit. So please stay tuned for that and keep on patching out there.